Hello, my name is Ellen Thompson, and I'm a literacy consultant for Partnerships for Literacy and Learning, which is housed here in Montpelier, Vermont. The video that I'm going to share with you today is around establishing routines for reading and writing at home. So let's get started. First, just a little bit about me. I've had a lot of lives, I think. I've been a mom, a wife, I'm a sister. I actually am a spinner, and I'm a goat farmer. We raise Angora goats, and that's a little baby in my lap there. And they produce mohair fiber, which I like to spin. We also opened a little gallery in the islands. And yeah, I live on an island, and always, always, I'm an educator. So I'm going to dig right in. And first, if you are doing home learning, you want to designate an official learning area. It helps in a lot of different ways when kids get the idea that what they do in this place has to do with learning, then they're more apt to act appropriately for that space. And the other part of it is you want to have everything ready. You don't want to be running around looking for the Scotch tape or the pencils or whatever it is. You want to stock it with everything that you might need, including a laptop or an iPad. You want books, all sorts of books, markers, crayons, poster paper, scissors and glue. And then the other piece that you want to do as you begin to designate this as an official learning area is you want to talk with your learners about what happens in this space. Why do we have it? How loud can it be? What are the behaviors that will usually happen in this space? So again, all of that helps if you start out with it versus trying to put that in after you've gotten things going. And the second one, and it's really what this whole video is about, is setting up learning routines. And I would just say that learning routines or routines in general are things that help us feel comfortable with our space. We all know that feeling that when we know what's expected of us and we know how to do it and we know when to do it, that we feel more comfortable and less threatened by it. So we want that for our kids too. We want them to create the routines to create safe, non-threatening, predictable learning environments that allow kids to put their effort into learning new things to challenge themselves. So again, we've freed up their brain space by having these routines, and it really allows them to dig into something new and challenging. So here we go. We're going to get into some routines. It's time to get started. Routine number one in any literacy home learning environment is reading aloud. So no matter the age of your child, reading aloud from great books is important. It gives the brain a workout for both the reader and the listener. It's where we begin to develop and learn the best of our vocabulary. It increases our background knowledge, and we get to visit different people and places. We learn new things. We learn all of this, whether we are reading aloud or listening to or reading ourselves. So again, it's really, really important to kind of have this as part of your very first routine. Most importantly, it helps to build sort of a reading community. So that idea of listening to somebody read a funny book, it's fun. And when somebody we know and love is reading to us, it actually is really a supportive activity. So for me, a read aloud routine is fairly simple. I would want to have at least 20 minutes of read aloud time, more if I could do it. And this is time that the reading is read by the adult. And you're using books that are challenging. They should be at the grade level of your learner or above. You want them to actually have to engage with the story, to actually have to make sense out of things. So they really are using those brain muscles. I always choose longer books, especially if I'm reading fiction at this point, that can be read over time. Reading a book over time allows you to really get to understand the setting, the characters, what the problem is, how it's going to resolve itself. Again, longer books let kids have a longer amount of time to understand that concept. Or I also choose in an informational book or an article. So I'm going to vary it. The Common Core now says that we should be reading 50% of the time informational text versus only narrative text. So again, think about that when you're choosing the books. And then the next piece of the routine is it's not just me reading on. There's a lot of reading. We stop and we discuss as we go. So we want to make sure that there's a lot of talk that's going on. And talk happens in 3 places in a read aloud. It happens before you read. So I never just open up the book and go. I always look at the front cover, I look at the back, I look at where we left off, and maybe I look at the chapter titles or the index. But I do a lot of talk with learners before I begin reading aloud. I want them to set their heads on this story. I want them to really be predicting about what's going to happen here. And then there's talk during the reading. Sometimes this doesn't happen, and it makes me sad because there are parts in anything that you're reading aloud where you just know you need to pause for a second and say, whoa, that part just made me think of something. And what just happened? Why did that happen? Why did he do what he did? Whatever it is. I used to always say when I was reading in front of a class of kids that as I was reading, I would hear that sort of audible gasp. And when I heard that, I didn't have to have a great question. I just needed to stop. And then I would say to the kids, what made you do that? Why did you gasp like that? And then we talk. And again, talk after reading is important too. That's where you kind of seal the deal. You kind of sum up the facts. You understand what's happened so far. And then you also begin to think about what do you think will happen next? And that's an important next step. Routine number 2. Now that we've had the read aloud, the next piece that I would want to make sure that I had in play for my learners is at-home silent reading. We know from the research that kids need to read their own text for long periods of time. The research would say anywhere from 30 to 45 minutes sustained reading silently for a child who's in 3rd grade or up. So we're building up to that part of it. So you design that at-home silent reading routine. You let the kids know that your learners know that you're aiming for 20 minutes or more of independent silent reading. And I always say with accountability. So in other words, this is an at-home silent reading time that is actually meant to help you become a better reader. So again, to grow your reading self. So I'm looking for my learners to pick books for themselves that are at their instructional level. And that sounds complicated, but it's really not. It's just the book is not too easy and it's not too hard. You want them to sort of have to work a little bit, but you certainly don't want them to have to work so much that they cry. That's not the idea. I do believe that some independent level reading is fine, and also some challenge books are fine too, but the steady diet should be more at that just right level. So again, we're aiming towards 20 minutes. We might start with 1 or 2 or 3, depending on the age of the child, and then we build it over time to 20 minutes. It shouldn't take that long, even for a 6-year-old to get to 20 minutes of independent silent reading. The next part of the routine is actually where do you do it? So where is that quiet place that we're going to read? And I would have your learner and you decide that. Maybe it's on the couch, maybe it's a pillow on the floor, whatever it is, but you want them to be in a place where they're comfortable, they have access to their books, and they can read. And then again, that choosing a book that's just right is an important part of it. I find that when I'm starting this up, that I often will read silently right alongside my child. So they see me as a reader. They realize I mean business, that I'm going to read too, and I'm usually reading a book that's for me. So I'm not trying to read, a technical book or a teaching book or whatever it is. I'm reading a novel or some kind of book that I'm really engrossed in at the moment, so they can see how I look when I'm reading. So obviously you need books, and depending on the age of your reader, you'll need lots of books, because you do want some books that are on the easier side, maybe familiar books that you've read together before, and then you want new books that are allowing them to challenge themselves, whether it's in the type of book, the type of fiction it is, all of those things matter. So these books obviously are narrative stories, but they range from a traditional tale to a longer book about school, to a bird, which is written in verse. So again, we've got lots of different types of text happening here, and you want your kids to become familiar with all the different types. And again, same thing goes for informational text, lots and lots of books. An informational text is a little different because sometimes the just right quality of the informational text is tied up with the pictures and the captions, not always the main text of the book. So that's just something to think about. So again, as we said, you need books that are easy, just right, and challenging. You need to include both fiction and informational books. And your basic goal here for silent reading is you want our children to become real readers. You want them to become readers who like to read and readers who see the value in reading. If they do that, they're more apt to read more. So again, as I said before, the choosing just right books is not really a tough thing. It sounds harder than it is. With little kids, I often use a very, very simple routine, which is the 5-finger rule. And that's the idea that a kiddo picks up a book, and I gotta find my books here, picks up a book like Bird, and then opens it up to a page, and they will read this page to themselves or out loud. It doesn't matter, but you're not like they're just checking out the text, right? They can open up to anywhere in the book. They read it, and as they read, if they struggle on a word or don't know it, they lift up a finger. If they get to 5 fingers on that one page of text, then probably the book is too hard for the child. Now, that doesn't always work, but it's pretty close. And especially with 6 and 7-year-olds, they kind of get the idea that they want to be more in charge of their own reading. The other thing I do with kids is teach them how to pick a book. So you want one that's interesting. Like, I love this book, and I picked this book because it has a medal on it. And when I see a medal on a book, I know that it's won some award. And this award that this book won was the Ezra Jack Keats Storybook Award. And I adore Ezra Jack Keats. So that's almost as if Ezra Jack Keats recommended this book to me. Okay, so this idea of recommending books by a friend is really important. You also want to challenge your learner to try different kinds of books. Like I said, this one's written in verse, but now I have A Long Way from Chicago by Richard Peck, which is a pretty standard chapter book. But in this, I'm looking at the cover, I'm looking at the back, I might look at the introduction. They actually have some of the writing inside, reviews of the book. So I'm going to show kids how to use everything the book gives you in order to try out a new book. The other way you do it is you read lots of books during different kinds of books during the read aloud. So if you start with A Long Way from Chicago, you might want to skip over to Bird the next time. And then after that, you might go to an informational text. So again, you're going to move around in those different types of books. And then if your child is still having a hard time, they just really can't seem to pick a book, what I often do is I might pick 2 or 3 books that are at a range of levels. So one might be a little easier, one, a little bit harder, one more hard. And I might say to the kiddo, hey, let's talk about each of these books. And then I want you to try out a page or 2 in each one, and you pick which one you like. So in other words, you're not going to wait 2 days for your kiddo to choose a book. They're having troubles, then you select a few and then do the book talk and let them have a look at those books and then let the child decide. It's still letting them make the choice. And choice in reading, and actually in a lot of things, is a very high motivator for kids. So if I choose the book, then I'll probably read the book. Here's another routine that happens. This idea of writing to understand my reading. As kids start reading longer books, like A Long Way from Chicago, some kids will read and just sort of they're saying the words are going through, but they're really not getting the gist of what's going on. So I often have my learners keep a journal or maybe a Google Doc. It doesn't really matter if it's on paper or not, where I have them jot down the title of the book they're reading. And then I might have them notice, are there interesting words that are coming up in that chapter that I like? And then I also will say, are there things happening in your head? Like, do you find yourself stopping? Do you find yourself asking a question? Well, let's take a Post-it note. Let's put that question down there. Well, they can keep those questions and those Post-it notes in their journal. And again, it's this idea of writing while I'm reading. This isn't about writing after I've read. This is the idea that you're keeping track while you read. Routine number 4 is conferring one-on-one. So we have read aloud, we have silent reading happening with your kids jotting down things around their understanding of their reading. And then you want to also have a time when you check in. So again, here's part of this accountability piece. This routine is owned by the adult and the learner. So I often think that really, if I were teaching my child at home right now, my learner could actually have own this routine too. In other words, they could ask to have a conference with me about my reading too. So you could kind of do it both ways. But in the regular sense, one-on-one conferring is usually done during independent reading. So in other words, you interrupt the child and say, hey, I'd like to hear about what you're reading. And it's used one-on-one, so the learner and the adult. You're using the book they're currently reading. And the reason why you do it is you want to build a better understanding of how that child is reading right now and to help scaffold next steps as a reader. So again, and then the last part you do in a conference is you actually say, hey, now that we know this, when you're reading, on later today, make sure you try this out, whatever this strategy is. So again, just to give a little more clarity on that part, it's your one-on-one conferring is your chance to nudge and celebrate with your learner. You can, there's nothing better than having a book buddy to talk to about the book you're reading. So you start with a book being read. The child is going to tell you about the book, and you can ask lots of open-ended questions. The kids that I taught really knew me as a reader. They knew what I liked and they knew what I didn't like. So often my best question in a one-to-one conference was, what do you think? Do you think I'd like this book? And they would be adamant. You'd hate it. There's too much, there's too many rainbows and unicorns. You don't like books like that, Miss T. So they would be able to judge their book on me as a reader. The other part I would have is I would say to the kiddos, well, you're up to chapter 4. Can you pick a page or two before that to read to me, maybe one of your special parts? And my kids know that we always do that when we one-to-one confer. So they usually come up with a bookmark in place and say, I've got my place all picked out. And then they read. Now, this isn't a cold read. This is letting them read something that they've already read to themselves. And then after that, you notice what you're doing while they're reading is you're noticing what they're doing as a reader. Does their voice sound fluent? Are they keeping track of the punctuation marks? Are they stumbling over certain words? Are there is there a pattern of something happening? So you're just listening and trying to figure that out. And so as you listen, you begin to decide what it is you think you want to share with them. You want to share something the learner is doing well and you celebrate it. I love books by Richard Peck. Have you read some of his other ones? You're going to just adore this book. He is so funny. And so we're going to talk about the stories he tells from the time he wrote this book when he was living in Vermont. And then what is the one thing that I could teach my child so that he or she can read more? So I might say to them, yeah, that was a great funny part you chose. I really like that. He has a great sense of humor. I was noticing when you read it, you skimmed through the punctuation marks, the end marks. And when you did that, you kind of went really fast through the punctuation marks. And I'm thinking that those punctuation marks are there for a reason. Do you know why they're there? And of course, your child will say, oh yeah, they're stop marks or they're pause marks, or they're asking a question, whatever it is. You say, that's right. And when we read, especially when we read out loud, we want to make sure we use those. They're like traffic signals. So let's try reading this part again, but make sure you watch for those end marks. And so they read it again and they watch for the end marks. It sounds great. You celebrate again. And then my connection would be, okay, well, you go on chapter 5, go for it. And this time, listen as you read inside your head for those punctuation marks. Are you using them? See if you can, and we'll talk about that later. So again, you've made that connection back to what they're doing next. Another routine, again, thinking we've got read aloud, we've got independent reading, we've got writing to understand my reading, and we've had a one-to-one conference. The next piece that would happen is this idea of writing about my reading. Now, I don't do this every day with a kiddo because especially little kids, it takes a long time to get things down on paper or even to type them. But I might, at the end of a week, have a 20-minute block of time that is writing about my reading. So then I take my book journal and I look through all the things that I've written in it from the last week, and I begin to write a longer response about what I've been reading. Now, if I'm reading a long way from Chicago, I've probably been reading this book all week because it's longer. If I'm reading Bird, I might have 2 or 3 different books that I've read. So I would then start to write about what it is that I'm noticing from my notebook. So part of what I might notice if Bird is the book I've been reading and other books is that I'm reading books that are filled with poetry. And so I want to write about why poetry is something I like. Or maybe I connected with this young man, Bird. And so I have some characteristics of Bird are similar to my characteristics. So I want to write about that. These little sentence starters can help for kids who are stuck. If they're reading a nonfiction book, you might ask them to write about what surprised you. Or what did you think? What did the author think you already knew? And was there anything in the book you just read that challenged or confirmed or changed what you knew already? And then for fiction, you just kind of go, the very basic here is like, what's in the book? What was it about? Like, who's Bird? What did he do? And then what's in your head? So if I'm thinking that Bird is a lot like me, then I might make that connection. This is a text to self connection, and I'm going to write about that. Or if Bird really did something that just made you feel wonderful, it was just very compassionate, I'm going to write about what's in my heart. What am I noticing about that? So again, I often do this type of writing just one time a week. I might say about 20 minutes or so, and I am making use of that book journal, whether it's a Google Doc or whether it's a paper book journal where they've done those jots, they've written down those interesting words, they've written down the questions that they had while they were reading, because those will help give them evidence for this longer response writing. So here's a writing about my reading routine, which I think I probably have given you a lot of the tips already, but you're going to read over the jots from the last time you wrote. So you're going through, and in this case, they are using their journal to write into. So they'll just take the next clean page and write. I often have my kids use a letter format. So dear mom, dear Miss T, dear dad, whoever it is that they want to write to, we're writing in a letter. It tends to be sort of a friendlier kind of format. Plus, it's a format they need to know how to use. They may write letters. Probably they will type letters, but they will do that in their life. They can try out a starter question. They can use their jots to help use evidence from the reading in your writing. So you want them to use the evidence from their book journal, not copying something from the book. So we try to keep those two things pretty separate. And then you want to sum up your writing with some statements about what the book or article made you think or feel. So we begin with dear, we start out with a question, we might use our jots, and then we're beginning to say, overall, this book really felt good to me, or I really like the books I've been reading lately because, and they tell you why. So one of the things that I think is really important, if you're writing in a letter format, a friendly letter format, the best part about a letter is not the letter you write, it's the letter you get back. So if we are going to write about my reading response, I am writing for myself, but I also want to know what other people think about it too. So most readers want to share their reading with others. So this is a time that I would write a response back to my learner. I would ask some wondering questions and ask them what book they're going to read next, whatever it is, but I would make a connection with them through their writing about their reading and my reading. So it might be that I want to read the book, or it might be that I've read another book by this same author, or whatever it is, but I'm going to share that in written format. Now, I'm a little subversive as a teacher. If I write all that, then they need to read all that. So again, we're making reading relevant. We're making reading matter. It matters with the special people who I read with, and it matters that that I understand that when I read something, I learn more about myself. So the last routine is really the whole deal. Okay, I've been repeating it along the way, but routine number 6 is putting together that reading work time. Sometimes we talk about a reading block in a classroom, but it's this time that you've actually built together. So I would do them together. I would begin with a read aloud with discussion, of course, with all that talk. I would move into independent reading with Just Right Books. That also includes the writing to understand my reading, the quick jots that I'm putting in my notebook, and then I would also fold in the one-to-one conferring, and then I would end with the writing about my reading. And again, I didn't always do that every single day. Kind of depends. So you could stop after independent reading and then save that writing about reading to Friday or to Thursday or to one day during the week, where they go back, they look about the jots they put in their notebook, and they write, they kind of sum up that chunk of reading for themselves. So I know you can do this. I know that this is actually a lot of fun. It's actually my best part of teaching, I think. Reading aloud is a great way to get to know your children. You begin to find out what they like, what makes them happy, what makes them sad, what facts interest them. You also can get into some big conversations through a book that are hard to start without it. So before, I had a book on the page with the pictures of books called Loser. Well, Loser is kind of it's a great story, but it's a tough story. It's about a kid who's sort of an outcast. And so when you get that conversation going, you might find out things from your child or about other children that might be of importance to you as a mom or a dad or an educator. The other thing you do with reading aloud is you share yourself as a reader with them. You give them your voice. So when they read inside their head, they have an example of a fluent reader. They can hear your voice. I always tell the story of my dad. My dad read aloud to us a lot, and there are certain books that I cannot read now without hearing my dad's voice in my head. And there are certain books that I did not read aloud to my son because I didn't want to lose my dad's voice. And one of those books was Stuart Little. So when I look at Stuart Little, I love that book. And I should have read it to Christopher, but I didn't, because inside that book is that voice, that cadence. I can remember where we sat. All of those memories are tied up in that particular book. It's pretty powerful. Reading independently is a great way to see what your children can do. Okay. Reading side by side shows them that you're a reader too. So just stepping back, let them do this thing themselves. It's really important they get the practice. And then the other part is just keep the routines going. Keep it, you don't have to jazz this up too much. You want to keep it going. And I think you'll be glad you did, because your kids will read more, they'll write more, and they'll talk with you more about their reading. Oops, it's time for me to get out of here. I've got that baby goat is looking for getting back to her mama. So there we go. You guys take care. I am going to go outside. And if you have any questions or you want to talk more, I think we're having a Talk It Out series with this particular video, but I also have my email addresses here too. So feel free to drop a note. I'm more than happy to talk more with you about establishing routines for learning at home. So thanks a lot. Bye, everybody.